Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will kick off by expressing my thanks to the Defense Minister of Russia, the Foreign Minister of Russia, the Deputy Defense Minister of Russia, the Secretary General of the SCO, and the Defense Ministers of Iran, Malaysia, and so many others, including our moderator, who condoled with Sri Lanka, with the victims, their families, and denounced in the strongest possible terms the terrorist blitz of Easter Sunday. Now, that's not incidental, because as a Sri Lankan, I view almost any topic in international relations through a frame which has two parameters. One is anti-terrorism, and the other is our commitment to the principles of non-alignment, however strong or weak the movement itself may be. So, anything that takes away from a global united front of states against extremist and terrorist movements is something that is negative. Any external intervention that shatters a state, releasing embedded extremist forces or allowing them to grow into terrorist movements or attracting external terrorism is something that is profoundly negative. And from the point of view of non-alignment, anything that upsets global equilibrium drastically is something that is negative to our interest in sovereignty and the collective sovereignty of the global South. That's my prelude. I'll follow Dan Smith in framing this in big picture terms. Color revolutions and hybrid warfare. What is most important is the conjunction of the two. And because we know that from Father Gapon to the Gilets jaunes, there will always be popular movements, maybe of a diverse, chaotic character, against grievances or against regimes. That's one story. But when movements are either created or distorted and instrumentalized by an external big power, then it's something else altogether. And that's what we're talking about today. I wish to make just two substantive points. One, the phenomenon of color revolutions and hybrid warfare has to be seen as a subset of a much larger set, and I think the point has been made by our Serbian fellow panelist. But what is that larger set? That's the first question. Because if you understand what the larger frame is, what the larger matrix is, then we will understand what's radically new and dangerous about the color revolutions and hybrid warfare that we see now. And the second and final point is that there is a dangerous asymmetry in the waging of hybrid warfare and color revolutions in the world today. Because one side is on the offensive and the other is fighting with one hand that it has tied behind its own back by itself. Now, as to the first point, I'll keep that short by saying that listening to the plenary discussions today, especially the brilliant lectures in the morning, I thought to myself, what would a future historian say 25, 30, or 50 years from now, looking back at 2019? Would he or she not ask the question, what were these guys thinking? Didn't they see that whatever the problems or the protestations, that there was something happening at the level of objective material facts, at the level of the deployment and disposition of military forces? And what is that? That is the encirclement, the envelopment of the Eurasian core states. On the western edge, where an alliance has moved up to the borders of Russia, going beyond the aims of the Cold War to actually scrapping all notions of Yalta and Potsdam, which is really what happened in 1999 in Serbia. It wasn't to do with the Cold War. It was the rolling back of Yalta and the agreements. So that's the western edge. And then you have the southern and eastern flank of Eurasia, the maritime theater, where there is an unprecedentedly rapid buildup of possibly the most massive armada that we have known. It's different because it's like a piano accordion. It shrinks and expands. It can be assembled at any time. But put together, you have a chain of facilities and you have an interlocking command and control structure of new alliance partners. So you have an old alliance on the western edge of Eurasia, and you have a new emergent alliance on the southern and eastern flanks of Eurasia. That is the big picture. And you cannot understand the phenomenon of color revolutions and hybrid warfare without understanding it as a prelude, as condition setting of some larger end game, or perhaps as the end game itself, where after the encirclement comes the color revolution as the end game. Now that's the big picture, and I urge you to try to understand this in those terms. To finish my story of the historian, possibly the historian will ask, in that context, what were the core states of Eurasia, of continental Eurasia, doing, remaining at the current level, at the 2019 level of cooperation, coordination, consultation, and not taking the leap to a parallel integration of command and control so as to bring about a global and grand strategic balance and equilibrium. But that's a question for future historians. That is my first point. The second and final point is that hybrid war and color revolution seems to be going pretty much only one way. Of course, we know the old ones from Guatemala 54 through destabilization of Chile and so on and so forth. But the color revolution and hybrid warfare phenomenon is primarily an updated version of a politico-military strategy, of relentless global political war, political and ideological. It strives to change public consciousness. It is relentless. It uses different ideologies. At one point or another, it's either neoliberalism or neoconservatism. Neoliberalism gave you Serbia. Neoconservatism gave you Iraq in 2003. It's not a conspiracy. It's the logic of the system. But the Eurasian states don't even name the system of which it is the logic. It used to be the place that named the system, and it was called imperialism. But now that's not a word that's even used. So what you have is a thick ideology with neoliberal and neoconservative themes, which is being used as the ammunition in this hybrid warfare. You have an organic politico-military conception on the one side, and on the other side, you have brilliant diplomacy. You have strategic stability, but then strategic stability was present even during the Cold War, when the Cold War was supposedly won by one side. What you do not have is an equivalent, balancing politico-military and ideological concept of competition and struggle on a world scale, because that is what is going on. And without that asymmetry, with that asymmetry, without that balance, then you have an even more serious threat to world peace than you would otherwise have. Thank you.